Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Bell, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. On today's episode, we have a very important conversation. We are speaking with Liv, who has really made an impact in our social media and in our daily lives, speaking about eating disorders and how autism and eating disorders have to go hand in hand when treating them. Liv lived with autism while also trying to battle and overcome an eating disorder, however, didn't receive the appropriate treatment because her autism was not acknowledged. On this episode, we take a deeper dive into what that means in terms of how we can support our neurodivergent teens and tweens who very often do experience eating disorders while simultaneously experiencing autism. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today, we have a very inspiring guest who is just full of positive energy, a wonderful autistic individual who has been through the recovery process for an eating disorder as well, but hasn't stopped there. She has just done such amazing work through writing and through coaching and Instagram, and her posts are just so positive and so light. Her energy is vibrant. The one and only Livia Sarah. Hello, Livia.
The one and only. What an honor. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So Liv, I can call you Liv, right?
Uh-huh.
So Liv, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, some of the most important things that they need to know?
Ooh, that's a big question. Honestly, I like to say that I'm a lifelong learner above anything, always. I think we all are. I have experienced a lot of trauma in my life. I have experienced a lot of hardships and experiences and, unexpected twists and turns, so to say, that often led me to believe that I would kind of be scarred forever and I wouldn't get over this. And at some point, when you've had an eating disorder for many, many years and you have done all the treatments, not all of them, obviously, but many of the traditional treatments as an undiagnosed neurodivergent person, you start feeling like you're broken. I grew up feeling very existentially isolated because you know you're different, but you don't know why. The deep thinking, speaking of why, constantly asking why, but why? You ask too many questions and you start to mask and you start to be someone you're not and you pretend. And what is the eating disorder? It's the escape hatch. I can at least do this thing correctly. And if there's OCD and anxiety and perfectionism tied into all of that, it's of course you're going to do that. I know that we really quickly dove into this, but I think the reason I bring up this context is that for me, so much of my recovery from my eating disorder has prompted me to ask, who am I and what do I want out of life? And it really taught me that I can't conform to society, to the system, to whatever the world is right now. I just can't do it. And I also have demand avoidance, so that's a huge thing. But I think for me, so many of my struggles and things that I've experienced in my life, they have led me to destinations, I guess, and to create connections that I wouldn't have created and I wouldn't have the opportunity to experience had I not had to get through those hardships. And that's why before we started recording and about all your recordings being deleted and you saying, well, if it was meant to be, they'll come back. That attitude, I love that because that's kind of the similar attitude that I have in my life now. I used to be so angry and upset and so mad at my parents and the system. Why did you traumatize me? Why did you force me into treatment even when I told you it wasn't working? And I think now when you have gone through so many things in life, you really start to have, I think, not only compassion for other people, but also for yourself and your own mistakes. And it allows you to kind of take everything and instead of come at it from this place of judgment of oh, that's bad, I shouldn't have done that. you can come at it from a place of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying, that trauma is like, oh, I'm just going to choose to learn from this, because trauma has a really real impact. And I still am working through a lot of my own trauma with my own coach and therapist. However, that mindset, that decision, am I going to actively hide in the corner and stay a victim versus how can I turn this into something that actually propels me forward in life? I think for all of us, that is a really, really real decision. Why do I keep saying really real? That is
super real.
Super real. That is a super real choice and decision that we can make. And I'm a very philosophical, deep thinker. This is going to sound darker than I mean it, but like every day for me is suffering. Feeling trapped in a human body, feeling paralyzing fear of failure. Everything I write, there's this amazing existential writer that died 100 years ago. His name is Franz Kafka. I've talked about him before. And he has this quote that I love. And he wrote in one of his diaries in 1914, doubt dances around every word even before it is written. And I think that quote kind of is like definition of my existence. Like, doubt dances around every action before it is done. Doubt dances around every podcast before it's recorded. And that's the perfectionism and the fear of failure, the fear of being existentially wrong in this world, fear of never being good enough. And again, I know we've like immediately gotten real deep because this is who I am. If you're going to ask me who I am, I'm going to show you everything about who I am.
Yeah.
And I have learned in having my own podcast and writing my books and sharing my stories, like it's this real, real raw vulnerability and not trying to put on some facade of like, yeah, I'm recovered from an eating disorder and my life is amazing now. No, it isn't. Like, arguably in many respects, I face more challenges, but these are like the actual real existential challenges of life of like,
right.
Who am I as a human being? And the eating disorder kind of covers that all up, right? And then that's kind of why I like to see it as an adaptation or an escape, or if we're being real blunt, as a distraction from what really matters to you. So anyways, long story short, who I am is someone who is relentlessly curious, who is constantly open to learning and discovering, and really also wanting to connect meaningfully with other beings. Because I think if you don't have authentic connection in your life, like, what's the point of any of it?
Liv, you've said a lot, but so much of it can just be bottled up. I think anybody listening can take everything you just said, the fear of failure, the need to control something when everything feels out of control, the fact that progress really isn't linear. There's like ups and downs and twirls. I have to remind myself that every day. You are a deep person. You show up as who you are. I can notice that from the way that you share and come alive on Instagram and just are raw and real. I'm using the word real because that is what this podcast is about, like really showing up authentically as yourself. And you have been through struggle, and we spoke about before the podcast our own struggles, and we got deep real quickly. So it's no surprise that we're getting real deep real quickly too, because sometimes just that is who we are. So nobody should hide who they are. And that's the tricky part, especially when we were teens and tweens and we were dealing with specific things and we felt isolated, we felt alone. The girls that I've observed also feel very alone. And in some cases, so alone that the first thing that I thought of when I started my podcast, actually, and I mentioned this on my first solo episode that came out recently, is that there was this girl that I observed, and I knew that she was very vulnerable because she really wanted a close friendship. And I know with you it was different because, of course, I know a little bit more about your story. I did some research on you, of course. You got to be prepared. And I know that you just didn't find a lot of people having the same interests as you. In her case, though, she was on the flip side where she really wanted that friend so badly that she was just such a good target for the people who wanted to take advantage of someone vulnerable. And as a result, she thought that her closest friend was someone who was taking away her lunch money every day. And she wasn't eating for literally like 3 months straight. And that's when I started really thinking about the girls. This was many years ago. And then I started seeing it again. And the boys are vulnerable too. I'm not going to say they're not, but there's a specific type of vulnerability. And I want you, if you can, Liv, to take us back to your childhood and your teen and tween years and just maybe share with the listeners, some of whom are neurodivergent, many of whom are neurodivergent, and professionals to think about what you were struggling with and what you wish maybe could have been a little bit different with how people approached you?
Yeah, so Honestly, as you're telling the story though about this girl at the lunch bunny, like I feel in my whole body like, oh my gosh, like I can imagine being that girl because from a very early age, I've always had something that I never trust anyone. And I think part of that was due to what you're just saying, like seeing very clearly that people take advantage of you when you are trusting or vulnerable or anything like that. Because I think especially autistic girls, but any autistic people, we come into the world as very curious, asking those deep existential questions. I remember being 3, 4, 5 years old being, what's the purpose of life if we're all going to die anyways? And my parents
I had
being
those
like,
thoughts too, at an early age.
what are we
Yeah.
supposed to do with this? And I think immediately, even without having it like indirectly being said, I think autistic people, we are able to read right through people. And you were talking before about like authenticity and like the moment we got on this call, like feeling like my aura kind of thing. Someone's aura, you cannot trick someone into believing you have an aura that you don't. Let's put it that way. Like if you are like pretending to be someone else right now, I would know that you're pretending to be someone else. It's like this mask that can't be, no, it's a personality or, this is another thing is I have a really hard time, ironically as an author, I have a really hard time with words just because when I speak, you can tell I speak with my hands because I speak from my soul. When I'm talking, I have no idea what I'm saying. Like this sounds crazy, but I don't use my mind. And because words, my soul does not speak in words, I often find myself wanting to say or express something, but being like, there's no words to describe that. So anyways, to put it into words, like being able to see people's hidden agendas. Like I've always been able to do that very well. And that's why, you know how like if you do a Google search and like it'll say sponsored at the top, like my mom and I were doing research once for something, and then my mom is like the opposite of me. She's like, so click the top result. And I was like, no, do not click it because it says sponsored. We do
They're
not want
selling
to
themselves.
We do not want to feed this algorithm.
Yeah.
And she was like, this
I'm the
is
same
so
way.
ridiculous. But like, that's why like sleazy marketing tactics, like I don't like ads or anything like that. Anything that's like, I feel like I'm being advertised to or like in that way where it's like make it seem like they're not advertising to me. I'm like, yeah, you can't trick me, you know? Anyways, I think part of that is also the demand avoidance is like, because you want me to buy, I'm not going to.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of thing. But I think that with the lunch money thing, I think if I was really young, when I was really young, and kids are just mean, and I noticed that, like, it was immediately like this wall went up. Like, I cannot trust anyone. I cannot be vulnerable with anyone because there were so many times that I had been, but I realized like it wasn't okay. Something that personally, I am a very direct person. I say things how they are. And when you're a little kid and you say things how they are and then you hurt someone's feelings and they start crying and say, yeah, hurt my feelings. I learned like, okay, I can't say anything anymore because I'm just being honest. Like the golden rule, like treat others how you want to be treated. I wanted people to be honest to me rather than tell me things that weren't true because I would be able to know that they weren't true anyways. And then we would get into like conflicts and stuff. I think when I was really young and immediately had this wall put up of I can't trust anyone, like when I'm vulnerable, when I am honest, like people don't appreciate that. You start like walking through life like as if you're walking on like a tightrope or
like on eggshells.
Yeah.
Right? Like you feel like you can't say anything or someone might, right? Go after you.
Exactly. And also just the existential loneliness, like even being around people, it honestly often made me feel more lonely than I already was. Just because there were all these people, but I knew none of them thought like me. I knew none of them got me. So I was very absorbed in reading books and in my schoolwork and in my sports. And quickly, as someone who I want to say I used to be competitive, but I think looking back, it wasn't competitiveness. It was me trying to prove myself. Like, no, look, I am worthy. I can do things. So being a straight A student, having all the teachers like me, be the best in all my sports. I played like 5 different sports growing up because I was constantly trying to prove, look at me, look, I can do things. And I've actually, funnily enough, noticed I've been going through a lot of very transformative period in my business and my life right now in the sense that so many of these things that I have been chasing for years of like, I want to have this podcast and I want to have this many listeners and work with this many people and have my book on the bestseller list. Like, I realize that so much of that is rooted in that me trying to prove myself. And more I'm realizing, like, I don't want to do any of this to achieve anything. I want to do this because it fills me up and helps me connect and do my purpose. And I mean, I'm 25, so most people who I speak to, this is why most people say, like, you're so wise beyond your youth. Because most of my friends are, like, way older than me. Because most 25-year-olds, okay, there's, like, the existential contemplation, but most 25-year-olds have not, like, had near-death experiences, have not been traumatized by, like, dozens of treatment centers, have not been told, like, you're probably gonna die anyways. Like, most 25-year-olds have done the high school and the college, the conformity path, as I like to call it. There's nothing wrong with the conformity path if that's your thing, but I couldn't do it. So back to your original question about growing up, I think that was, like, the main theme was loneliness and alienation. And that's kind of where, for me, and also this, like, lack of purpose and direction, like, not knowing, like, why are we all struggling through this life if it's so hard and so lonely and so pointless? Like, what's the point? And then for me, it all kind of started in 5th grade when you're 11 years old and you're learning about health and nutrition and puberty and all the things. And it was, like, almost so obvious to me about, like, oh, if I just am this, like, perfect healthy eater, and I'm not even joking you, I had a black and white composition notebook, you know, the one from Staples with, like, the
Yeah, of course. Oh my gosh. Such nostalgia right now. I'm like, I feel like I'm back in school.
I don't even know if kids still use those.
They do. They do. They still do.
They do?
Mm-hmm. Them at our local pharmacies,
perfect. Yeah, because, I mean, we didn't have the laptop when I was growing up as a kid. Like, the iPhone came out, like, later. So anyways, I saw a flip phone with my first phone. Still watched VCRs.
Oh.
Anyways.
Oh my gosh, you're really bringing me back.
Yeah.
I miss those days. They feel like more simple days. They were hard days for you because there's an age gap between us, but what?
Still simple days. I mean, I'm 1999, so I'm, like, right before the whole, you know, because my sister, who is 18, she grew up with the TikTok dances, and I remember looking at her being like, this was not me when I was your age.
It's so interesting because I view your age group as also doing the TikTok thing and also being kind of that Gen Z energy, but you're so not like that at all. Like, that's, like, the antithesis of who you are.
I think I was, like, right before that. But I think a part of it is also because I'm autistic. I don't even have TikTok at all still because I call it a black hole of addiction.
It is.
TikTok's going to get banned. I'm like, why would I gamble with this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did some dancing on TikTok, and then I realized, like, oh my gosh, like, I should just dance, like, when nobody's looking. And then I just got
fun.
But it was fun for a while. And then I realized, wait a second, like, the content they're sending me, like, when I started noticing, was so targeted, like, towards, like, an agenda, like you said about agendas.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't like that either. I'm with you on that. I'm a good BS detector. But people don't like that all the time. Yeah,
no,
I get it.
People don't like that because it means that you're going to challenge the status quo, and people don't like when you do that. So the loneliness, and then when I was 11 learning about health, I just followed these healthy eating rules perfectly. This will give me some direction and purpose in life. And then I don't know if you had to do this, but in school you had, like, the fitness tests, like the pacer test where you have to, like, run before the beep and stuff. And I made everything a competition. So I was like, I'm going to train for this. I'm going to prove that I'm the fittest girl in the class. I mean, I took it, like, so seriously. And that was, like, kind of the start of everything, because I won the pacer test, which wasn't even a competition, but I won it. But it was, like, this indescribable sense of, like, euphoria. And I think that also being ADHD, it was, like, this dopamine high that I got from the restriction and the exercise. And this is something that people don't like to talk about in the eating disorder space, but, like, almost feeling, like, superior in a lot of ways. Like, when you see your family eating the chocolate cake and you can, like, not eat it, like, with no remorse, there's this sense of, like, I can defy human needs. And that, I think, was something that makes anorexia such an addictive illness, or whatever we're going to call it. It's because there are so many, like, I don't want to say benefits, but, like, so many things that you get from it that give you this high in life. Of course, at the cost of your entire life, But it's the same as, not exactly the same, but, people who are alcoholics or smoke or whatever, like, they know logically they're ruining their relationships, they're ruining their health, they're ruining their whatever. But at the same time, it's like this escape, this form of numbing yourself that is just unmatched to anything else, right? And that's, I think, what can just make it become so entrenched. So yeah, I struggled with anorexia from age 11 to age 17, and all this time being forced into treatment because you're a minor. Why say you? Because I work with so many people, and it's so funny because it's like copy paste the same story forever.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of us have a lot of the same stories. Based on what we were discussing before the podcast, it sounds like we've all been through some system that made us try to conform.
Exactly. So you're a minor, so you don't really have any say in the matter. If you're not eating enough, your parents are going to be worried about you. So I had to go to the hospital. And this was kind of the start of the trauma, was because for me as an autistic person, the eating disorder, and I mean, I even hesitate to call it that. I like to use the term eating adaptation because it's an adaptive response to feeling unsafe in your body, in the environment, in the world, whatever. And immediately I thought I was fat, and they thought I wanted to lose weight and look like the thin people on the magazines. And for me, it was never about the way I looked. Like, of course, to a certain extent, part of the masking is putting on this persona, but there was a point in the eating disorder where I was so emaciated, like I was so skinny, and I hated the way I looked because I was like, I look like a skeleton. Like, I hated the way I looked, but I felt like I couldn't change it. I felt like I couldn't eat more. I couldn't rest because I would have to like give up this escape, right? And that's kind of the trauma of the treatment, is all this focus on healing body image and trying to love yourself and love your body. But it was never about the body. It often isn't about the body. Like I said, the numbing, but also like in terms of like the existential questioning, when you are so malnourished and you are constantly obsessed with food and exercise, there is literally no space or capacity to ask about the meaning of life and the purpose and who do I want to be, who am I? So again, that's why I like this adaptive term, because it numbs you from everything and gives you this very clear, simple box to live within. And I like to kind of see this box as like a shelter that's also a prison at the same time. And that's something that I work on a lot with my clients. They tell me like, yeah, but the eating disorder is keeping me safe, protecting me from responsibility. I'm like, yes, like very true, very valid. And at the same time, it's also shielding you from everything that matters to you more than the false safety of an eating disorder, right? See, in a nutshell, that's kind of, again, this is tip of the iceberg, but hopefully that gives some context.
No, but Liv, everything that you've said so far resonates with me, just in terms of my journey and the journeys of so many others listening to this podcast, because I myself have been through that feeling of, okay, this anxiety that's being caused by this is making me feel distracted by other things going on in the real world at large, right? It tricks you and it makes you feel safe in the moment, but long term, or even like very short term, it actually leaves you in this constant chasing after, trying to get that glimmer, right? Trying to get that high. Almost like you said, an alcoholic. I think any type of like mental health theme like follows the same trajectory, just based on my own experiences and my background in psychology, my stint with that before I became a speech and language pathologist, which also is rooted in psychology. And I just know that it's like that high that you get from feeling good at the expense of the long term that makes you keep running for more and more and more. And so I totally get that, because that's been also my experience with all of this and so many others' experience. And it sounds like you did go through a lot. You recognize that you said, oh, I said trauma a few times earlier, but trauma is something that really does come back, and it keeps coming back, and it keeps trying to enter your world, right? Because it's hard to relive things that occurred in the past that were so hard, and that people around you really didn't notice how it was impacting you. And you knew it was impacting you, and you verbalize it so well now. You probably knew in the moment, oh my goodness, right? This is a lot. And so it sounds like people were trying to support you. Yeah. They were doing the best that they could with the knowledge that they had. But it also sounds like they were missing something. And I think that this is where, Liv, like you really have spread awareness on this, which is that you're trying to help somebody with an eating disorder who's trying to, in your case, and many other cases, as you're a coach for others, but you can't support them by telling them one thing. And especially when you add autism into it, right? If you're going to give a prescriptive approach and say, do this and this and this and this, and don't do this and this and this, that goes against how we even work with people who have autism, because it's non-prescriptive. It's not supposed to be, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. We stay away from that as professionals, right? But a lot of people may not know that. So I'm just curious, Liv, how do you think they could have supported you better? I'm just thinking about the girl with the lunch money. You said that could have been you. Did they not understand that you had autism? Was it a revelation for you?
Who is they?
Oh, like your parents and the other people that were involved in your medical care. Did they not understand autism at all, and how you were trying to work on that at the same time, and that was contributing to your sense of loneliness and isolation?
They didn't. No one knew about autism. I
really
self-diagnosed myself as autistic when I was 20. Yeah, so that's a very, obviously, very important piece of... I have this thing that I assume everyone has read my book, and then I gloss over very important details. But yeah, it's actually very funny because, and I think that's why I'm such an advocate for, in eating disorder treatment, the most important things is that, I'm going to put in air quotes, professionals need to be able to recognize autism in people. And there's this myth of like, yeah, but eating disorders mimic autistic traits, so you can't diagnose someone with autism. That is a huge mistake and very dangerous.
Of course.
Right? Yeah, because
there's so many co-occurring in things that come into anything. There's sometimes people have 5 different things going on at the same time. And I had somebody, sorry to interrupt you, I always say pass the baton, right? we used to say pass the baton. No, but even I had somebody on here that was talking about the co-occurrence of OCD with autism too. And she had a child that went through this path. And you can't look at one without looking at the other. That's not looking at the whole person. And because they were so focused on the autism, they weren't looking at the OCD, kind of the opposite of you. And then the OCD is a very debilitating illness that can also cause a lot of other problems that also look like. But just because things look like each other doesn't mean they are the same at all. And you can't look at one without looking at the other, which is why you had mentioned earlier, which I agree with you, diagnoses are also a problem. But anyway, so continue with...
Yeah. So I went through all of treatment. It was just the eating disorder and the anxiety and the depression and the OCD, of course. But autism, neurodivergence, ADHD never entered the conversation. My mom had a friend who was a therapist who worked with autism, and she came to her house once, and this was when I was 15, so I was actively in the anorexia, weighing my carrot sticks, slicing crusts off of bread so that it would match the weight on the package. Ridiculous stuff. And I remember she said to my mom, like, I think Livia may be autistic. But it was kind of a throwaway comment. It's like, oh, okay, like, well, what are we going to do with that? Like, it's not going to give us anything. It's like saying, oh, this mug has a line on the side. It's like, okay, like, why would we pay attention to that? Who cares? So anyways, that was kind of interesting because she had suggested my mom buy a book called Asper Girls. And
I have that book.
Yeah. And that's actually, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to get to the story about the significance of that book, because I talk about that book in my book, Rainbow Roll, about how it was so pivotal for me. So anyways, I struggled with the anorexia until I was 17, until I was having panic attacks every single day because your brain is so malnourished. You cannot think clearly
You can't function like that or adequately, right? Can't think clearly.
So I was hurting everyone around me, physically, emotionally, mentally. And I realized there was one night, and I call it like my rock bottom moment, and I talk about it in my book. And Sharon, I can send you the book after this if you want.
Oh, I would love
just
it.
Like
I mean, I actually read excerpts of it. I have excerpts of it, but you can send me all your books. I want the cookbook too, but we'll talk about that in a moment.
Okay, cool. Everyone else listening, though, like, you have to buy it. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you got a book, everybody. Rainbow.
Please support me. So I realized on my rock bottom nights, this isn't about me anymore. This isn't about me having control or feeling safe or whatever. This is actually making everyone around me feel very unsafe. Like, it was like the whole at-home family dynamic was walking on eggshells. It was this constant, like, storm cloud above our house. It's like, when is Livia going to have her next panic attack? When is Livia going to, like, hit mom because she didn't count the almonds correctly? Like, it was... And I have 2 younger sisters who have a lot of their own trauma because my dad, he's not listening to this, he is a narcissist. And, yeah, so there's so many...
I never dealt well with that.
Yeah, so there's so many traumatic layers that add to that as a family. And autism, undiagnosed autism, ADHD there, that was never aware, no accommodations,
Yeah, back in our days, for all the young ones listening, back when we were watching black and white TV, as my nieces and nephews used to say, yeah.
Yeah, so I remember running up to my room and just screaming and crying and being so hopeless and saying, I cannot do this anymore. And that moment was so profound because I think the acknowledgement of like, I couldn't do it anymore, it was this, even though I was still in anorexia and I was still malnourished, like the fact of me even admitting that was basically saying like, I can never go back to engaging with the anorexia because I have admitted at this that I'm actually choosing this almost.
Wait, and so that's so liberating, it sounds like, so freeing in the moment.
Well, it actually causes you to feel trapped because you can't go into your escape route, right? And in my quasi-recovery book, I actually talk about this. Is that...
Yeah, you just dropped that, by the way. The quasi-recovery book just came out along with the workbook, right? So for anybody listening, Liv has done such great work as an author. And so Rainbow Girl was really about your experience growing up and everything. And in terms of dealing with the autism and the eating disorder recovery. And it really is a great piece for anybody looking to be uplifted in any way. But then there's a cookbook, which Nourishing Neurodiversity, which is interesting as someone with an eating disorder. But again, something really great because it nourishes the body and soul. But then your most recent endeavor, you've been very busy, I know, for the last couple of months, right?
Yeah.
I mean, busy is an understatement, but Liv has been working on the I believe, recovery book where people don't feel fully recovered. Like you said, they feel trapped and they feel like they can't get to full recovery, right? They're like in limbo. And there's a workbook with it that can help people who are dealing with this.
Yeah, so the reason I bring this up is because what quasi-recovery is basically that teetering between full-blown eating disorder and being fully free. And I have a group coaching program called the Autistically Eating Free Academy. Yes, I am very busy.
You're beyond, I mean, day and night. It sounds like you have 4 full-time jobs, yeah.
Yep, I do. And unfortunately, writing a book does not pay the bills. So you have 4 full-time jobs that don't make any money.
That impact everybody and that have people messaging you on Instagram saying that you basically saved my daughter's life.
Yes, true.
Right. So it's the things that don't pay well, right?
Well, and that's the thing is like money is from writing a fiction novel at the moment. And in this book, I write about one of the characters is reading a dystopian novel titled Earth. And they're giggling with their friends about these humans, they trade pieces of paper and they think it gives them power. Ha ha ha. Because it's so true, and the whole money thing is like, I don't ever do any of it for the money. And at the same time, it's like, I also don't want to be sleeping under a bridge.
Of course. Yeah, there's a balance, right? Like in everything in moderation. But that moderation I always find in my life, I don't know about you, Liv, because we're so in sync, but like I feel like it's so hard to get that moderation. It's either this or that. Like, where is the middle ground on all these things that I want?
Well, with that, I mean, moderation is one of those words that I'm like, I don't even strive for moderation or balance because for me it is always either this or that. And I have now kind of acknowledged and accepted like it is always this or that. But when you're swinging between 2 extremes, at the end, the mean is moderation, right?
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
Like balance is a flat line. And think about when are we a flat line? When we are dead, right? On the heart rate monitor. That's when we have a flat line.
Okay, yeah.
And I think a word that I like to replace with the word balance, I know it sounds more clunky because balance is such a nice word and it's so aesthetic. But like
making fun of everybody that talks and preaches balance. You can have balance, right?
Oh, I'm totally making fun of them.
What is it? All the coaching services? Oh, you'll have balance in your life within 6 weeks, right?
Yeah, I mean, that honestly just makes me want to throw up because it's all the same. It's all the conformity stuff. And I'm like, if you're just going to copy what someone else is saying, like, why aren't you just them? Anyways, so I like the term homeostasis a lot more because homeostasis is constant flux, but it's like this, it's like a wave that's going up and down. But like when you look at the average of the wave, it's this like straight line between the up and down. And that's kind of how I think is more attainable or realistic for neurodivergent people. Is like, if I'm riding the top wave, I'm not going to be down here. But the next day I may need to be down here and the next day go up here. And at the end of like, not the day, but end of the week, the end of the year, the end of 5 years, like you create your own balance by being up and down the whole time.
I love that. I think that could be helpful to anybody listening. Like, just because balance is unrealistic, like the way the society, the world is designed and the fast pace of all of it, like you're right. Balance is just flat. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, and then people call that like unstable, like there's an instability or something. And so people start feeling unstable when there's ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs, right? And it's just a feeling of instability, right? It's not it's a thought. It's not.
And instability, if you think about it, anything meaningful is not stable, right? Because stable is knowing exactly what's going to happen. It's having a guarantee of the outcome. And as soon as you have a guarantee of the outcome, well, then what you're doing is paint by numbers and you're not doing anything meaningful, right?
Literally.
Right. And that's why, like, this whole balance thing, I'm like, I don't want to be in balance, because if I'm in balance, I'm fucking stagnant. I don't want to be stagnant, right? So it's funny how, and this is why I love that curiosity, lifelong learner mindset, like living label free is literally deconditioning yourself from everything you believe you need, you think you should be, or need to be, or what everyone else is doing. Because when you take away all the conditioning, and you actually start asking why are things the way they are, and you see things for the way they are, you realize that the answers are right in front of you, but you just couldn't see them because everyone else has been covering it up with their Instagram posts and YouTube videos or whatever it is.
Right. And if it's on Instagram, it's a system that's telling you this is how you're supposed to be. And if you go out of line in any way, and I've been in systems like that, then they don't really necessarily endorse it. They want to take you out of that environment because they're not happy with that.
Right. So we were talking about my rock bottom moment and the Autistically ED Free Academy, the group program that I run. I have this graphic in there that is this it's like a little hill, and at the top of the hill there's a ball. It can go one or the other way. And the graphic, I call it like the tipping point. And like you start with eating disorder, then you start thinking about recovery, and then there's quasi-recovery. It's like, yeah, like I want to get better, but I don't want to gain weight. I want to heal my relationship with food, but I don't actually want to eat more food. That's and then the tipping point, and the reason why I brought this up is because there's a quote in my quasi-recovery book by Thomas Edison, and he said, "Discontent is the first necessity of progress." And why I bring all of this up in regards to that rock bottom moment is like the moment that you say, I can't do this anymore. In other words, the moment that you say, I am not content with the way my life is, that is unconsciously the first step to actually changing and making progress. But once you admit to yourself that you are not content, you can never go back to the life that you were discontent in because there's too much awareness at that.
Yes.
It's like when you learn to read, you can't unlearn it ever. No matter what you do, you can't unread, right?
Yeah. It's so interesting when you accept the fact. It's about acceptance too. I love ACT, commitment therapy more than others. But basically, it's all about accepting what you have. It doesn't mean you're agreeing with it. It doesn't mean you're agreeing with everything about it, but you're accepting things as they are. And you also are acknowledging that, oh my God, like this is not a good situation for me. This is not a good place for me. And so I can't go back there now, because how can I go back to something that doesn't align with my values if you're a values aligned person, right?
And this is why quasi-recovery, that middle point, is so painful, because you can't go back to the eating disorder because it's not aligned. But the reason why you're not fully free is because you're terrified of the freedom, right? At this point, I'm a very existentialist person. I quote a lot of the famous existentialists, and Soren Kierkegaard, who was a famous existentialist, he said, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, right? And in many ways, an eating disorder takes your freedom away. OCD takes your freedom away. Alcoholism, smoking, insert whatever the addiction or illness or maladaptation is, it takes away your freedom, but it also takes away the dizziness that accompanies choice. Should I go this way or that way? I don't know which way is right. Oh my God, fear of failure. I need someone to choose for me. I need a predetermined path. And that's why so often, and this is why I wrote this book, How to Get Out of Quasi-Recovery, is because so often these people who are struggling, who want to be free from the eating disorder, and they're terrified, they're looking at other people's Instagram accounts, they're watching What I Eat in a Day videos on YouTube, they're looking for, I need some evidence-based way out of this. But this whole book, How to Get Out of Quasi-Recovery, is the map is a trap. You cannot follow someone else's map to create your own version of freedom, right? So anyways, I know that we were talking about the autism piece before I discovered that.
I went off topic. That was my bad.
No, but this is what I say on my podcast too, is like the more tangents, the better, because otherwise it's not an authentic conversation.
Yeah.
Not
Twists and turns. We love a good twist, right?
Right, exactly. So with the Asperger's book, my mom had all these eating disorder books, help your teen be an eating disorder, a lot of the FBT stuff, which is so traumatizing, which is short for family-based therapy, which is a rabbit hole I won't get into, but anyone who has lived experience of an eating disorder or who supports someone will probably know what FBT is. So I was 17, said I can't do this anymore, started my recovery, and I'm going to do a shortcut to 2020 because otherwise we could be talking for another hour. But in 2020,
You'll come back though. We're going to have a part 2 because this conversation I love the depth and I love the spunk. And yeah, you have so much to give to everybody with so many different things. So you're going to come back again. Okay.
Thank you. Perfect. So fast forward to 2020 and I started my coaching business. And I was like, yep, because I had already been blogging and doing my Instagram since like 2016, I think. And so I have been, I can't believe I've been doing that for over 10 years. Like
it's
on
amazing.
and off.
A decade-versary.
Yep. And it has evolved a lot. Like in the beginning, it was like me journaling, basically. Like my sisters didn't eat breakfast. Like that's literally how my Instagram started. And now it's completely different. And I started it not knowing I was autistic too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I started my coaching in 2020, and I remember my very first client was autistic. And still, I don't know anything about autism. I think Rain Man, boy who sits in the corner and plays with trains, right? That's my idea of autism. That's
common stereotypes.
Family's idea of autism. And I was shaking and sweating because first client, I have no qualifications. I didn't go to college. Like, I did this because I was failed by the qualified system, and I wanted to help other people in the same way I had helped myself. So I asked my first client, like with trembling hands, like, so what caused you to reach out to me? And I had my story on my website about being called too complex and being tossed out of the system and being told I was never going to get better. And she said, I so resonated with that. And I think, and because I am autistic, she said. And I was like, can you explain a little bit more to me? So she was telling me about autistic traits and the way that she operates. And I was like enlightened. But it's like, because I was like, you are literally describing me. And it was at that moment that the eating disorder too, it was like, it all makes sense. Why it was never about fear of fatness. Why it was never about body image. Like all of these autistic traits had like manifested and made their way into the food and exercise. And it was like this perfect recipe for what appeared to be an eating disorder, but what I now prefer to see as an eating adaptation because it was a manifestation. So anyways, after that first session, being the autistic human that I am, I'm like, I need to know and learn and research everything I can about autism.
Of course, yeah.
And I knew my mom had that book, Asperger's. So I read that. So I grabbed the book, Asperger's, and I think in one afternoon, I read the entire book. And it was,
I love that book.
Yep. And that was when I knew I'm autistic. And that's why I said self-diagnosed, like initially, because like, I was like, yeah, a professional can diagnose me. Like I can get 20-second opinions, but I don't care what anyone else says because I have just qualified myself.
The best diagnostician is a person who's lived the experience, right?
Exactly. And at that point, especially after reading that book, there was no denying that there was no possibility that I wasn't autistic, right? So that's kind of led me to a whole identity of like, okay, what does this mean for... Well, no, I hadn't started my podcast. This was like right before I started my podcast, actually, because this... Or before, something like that. Because I remember making a YouTube video, how I found out I have autism. Yeah, that was before everything. And then from there, it was like really... It was like, it's that awareness. Once you have that awareness, you start connecting dots that you haven't seen before. And that's when I started really seeing this overlap of eating disorder, autism, and realizing there was this void of like, why is no one talking about this void? And so I remember changing my Instagram bio to bridging the gap between autism and eating disorder. And more started talking about the underlying mechanisms like the sensory sensitivities, difficulty with hunger, being traumatized by treatment, why treatment doesn't work. And I started gaining a following of other neurodivergent people and saying, like, for the first time, this resonates so much with me. And that's how I knew, like, I am onto something. And now here we are.
Wow. And here we are. And this is so crazy because this was 2020. That was 5 years ago. And I've had people on this podcast that got a later diagnosis, right? When they were a little bit older. You're still really young, but older than the people that many of us professionals work with, where the diagnosis is a little bit earlier, maybe even in the teens or before that. But now we have all these advocates coming out that literally spent their whole life, like they were like already middle-aged, and then they suddenly, the spouse said, go figure it out. But a lot of them were having an existential crisis when they had this part of their identity because they didn't know how to cope with kind of that diagnosis. But it sounds like you embraced it, or you felt relieved by it and then turned pain into purpose, kind of?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, first of all, about the people later in life, because I've actually had so many clients that have come to me like 50, 60. I had one client who's 75 who came to me and said, I always knew I had an eating disorder. It wasn't until your content that I started questioning whether I might be autistic. Yeah, and I was like, it's some of those moments are like it's indescribable about like the impact that you literally can see right in front of you that you have made on a human being. So
you do it every day. I mean, I'm uplifted when I see your page.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm always like, I take a look at it and you're just so, it was no surprise to me that this was your personality, because who you are there is who you are here. So
yeah, but that's the thing, because I think when you also spend so many years of your life trying to put on this facade of like, I need people to like me because rejection, sensitive dysphoria. And when one of my quote unquote friends, when I was little, would say something like that wasn't very nice, I would run home and I'd see, she hates me, we're no longer friends, it's over.
I get that. I'm a sensitive soul. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So about like the embracing the diagnosis, I think it's funny because before, like when I discovered the autism, I'm a very fact-based person. Like if I know this is true, like there's not really a story around it. Like I didn't have an identity crisis at all, because I was like, this explains everything. Like end of story.
Wow.
That was kind of it. And it wasn't until I started like reading other people's experiences with having an identity crisis and like not knowing how to embrace the autism and stuff that I started being like, oh, so that's like another way to experience it. But like for me, that was, and I don't know, if I definitely think age has to do with it. Like if I was, I don't know, 60, I have had all these jobs and couldn't hold a job and was in marriages and the marriage failed and had kids, and why was pregnancy so uncomfortable or not? And then you discover the autism. I think that's a totally different experience than someone. I have had a lot of experience in my life, but I've never been married. I've never had an official job, except we're not going to count working at the grocery store when I was 15. Well, like I've never been to college. Like I don't have kids. I've never had to buy a house or have a mortgage. Like I rent and I work hard, but there are a lot of things that I have not had to deal with just because of my age. And I think that I can only ever speak from myself and from my own experience. But for me, reading Asperger's, meeting this person who was basically a reflection of myself, like this is who I am. It was actually kind of the opposite of an identity crisis. It was like, I finally understand who I am better after all these years.
Wow. I have a couple of follow-up questions, and I know we're going to have a part 2, and I know, so I don't want to keep you too long. But in terms of that, though, so you read this book, right, and you probably travel back in time in your head, I can imagine, in terms of, wait, that lines up and that makes sense. And just thinking back to your teens and tween years, which are so pivotal, like you said, the hormones, the puberty, the trying to fit in. And then on top of it, you realize now, wait a second, I had autism that whole time, and that was feeding an eating disorder. Can you take us back to all of those that are feeling really alone because they know they have autism and they're trying to fit in so hard? And I ask this question a lot on the podcast because everybody has a different answer, but like a lot of them overlap. But were you trying so hard to fit in? And if you were, is there anything any advice you can give to those who are trying to fit in the way that maybe you were trying to?
Yeah, I think what I want to say is something that I wrote in an email, like, because I have a weekly newsletter. A few
That's a
weeks.
fifth job, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, then I have, like, infinity jobs. A few weeks ago about, like, being a cog in a wheel. And I say we have enough cogs already. Like, the last thing the world needs is for you to also be a cog. So I think this kind of ties back to almost related to the balance thing. It's like everyone says, strive for balance. But I think a benefit of being someone who cannot conform and of someone who questions everything is you start wanting to do the opposite, and you realize, like, well, maybe the opposite is actually the better way. Because for me, being like, I don't want balance. Like, I'm gonna never have balance actually made me realize this allows me to fully do the things I want to do because I don't have to worry about balancing it out the whole time, right? And it's the same with the fitting in. It's like if you're trying so hard to fit in and you want the magic pill, the magic path to fit in, well, what would not fitting in look like? And how would that set you free? Because every single thing I do in a day and in my business is probably the opposite of what most people do. And this is why I feel like I live my life on purpose, is because everything I do is precisely not fitting in. It's not conforming. It's not being a cog. Because even if we just make this very, zoom out and we look at all of the biggest contributions to our world and our society, like Albert Einstein, E=mc², these amazing musical composers, they were doing the opposite of what everyone else was doing. That's the definition of a revolution. It's something that's completely new and different and original. And something that I talk about in my quasi-recovery book, it's divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is recovery, part 2, discovery, and part 3 is art. And entire part 3 is about the fact that you are an artist. As a human, by definition, you are original, you are an artist. And the reason for your existence is to create art. And I don't mean painting or writing. I mean bringing your unique essence into everything that you touch and you do. That is being an artist. And you, by definition, cannot be an artist if you're fitting in.
It's so fascinating that you say that, because the whole approach that I have used as a professional, guided by the social thinking curriculum, amongst many other people that I look up to, was always about thinking about the individual as an individual and their individual strengths and interests and harnessing that, because you can't teach social. The only way for someone to be social is through connection, like what we're doing right now, right? Is to connect organically and just be ourselves, right? Just show up and say, this is what's going on, right? And so that whole approach really allows the person to not look at their special interests as special interests, but as things that are going to eventually forge their career one day, maybe, or that's going to help them contribute to society. That's going to really allow them to align with their passions, like what you're doing right now. What you're doing right now is really the way that we want our teens and tweens to develop, but it's so hard sometimes because those oh my gosh, don't take me back to middle school, please. But those middle school, high school years they were tough on me. They were really tough. I don't think people realize how tough it was for me because I was masking also a lot of things. So I totally get it. But if there's a takeaway here, it's do the opposite. Don't be a cog in a wheel. Liv said it. Do not be a cog in the wheel. As hard as it is, because it's hard to not be the cog, right? To just take down all the expectations.
It's risky.
Yes,
this is why
social risks.
This is why we are cogs in a wheel, because it's safe. It is safe to do the predetermined thing. But again, what would you rather be? Would you rather have a predictable, safe little existence, or would you rather have an existence, yes, that's thrilling, but there's a reason there's that expression, it's the thrill of a lifetime. It's because your life, you only have one. It's so cliche, but you only have one lifetime. Time is the only finite resource on this planet. And if you're going to spend all this time just trying to copy paste what's Slim Kim, who's living next to you.
Is she still Slim Kim? I don't even know anymore.
Jimmy,
What's her name? I don't even know. I can't keep up with the Kardashians.
I don't know, because in my book I give people funny names, because I say you can follow Slim Kim on Instagram with Jimmy Junkie, who's obsessed with the gym.
People have the same names on Instagram.
I don't even know. But I'm like, if you're going to copy and paste anyways, I quote in my book, Quasi-Recovery, you might as well go back to bed, right? If you're not going to wake up and be you, why even wake up in the first place?
It's so true, but it's, again, so hard. But that is really so important, not to be the cog in the wheel, to really check in and reflect and be with yourself. And it's really hard because also you did something amazing. And when I was listening to your story about how you, in the moment, realized, wait a second, look at the effect this is having on my family. Look at what it's doing. Look at how I'm acting. That was a moment of really deep introspection, which I think is also hard for anybody to do, let alone someone with autism, because sometimes you're not always noticing 100% what is going on around you, or you're not making the connection, right? Because the way the brain works is that sometimes you can't make the connection without proper training in terms of, wait, oh, that's what's happening again, and this is happening again. And it's the episodic memory, as they like to call it in the fancy clinical jargon, which is the same episode keeps happening, but why does it keep happening? What am I doing each time? So it almost seems like you're basically coming to this conclusion on your own. How do people do that? How do people just come to that conclusion on their own in terms of how these actions are affecting who they really want to be. And again, like the teens and tweens really listening and the professionals like who are supporting them. Yeah, how do they get to that point?
This is why I'm going to say the map is a trap and there is no how-to. There is no how-to for your own conclusion. This is what I always tell my clients as a coach is I'm not here to lead you the way. This is your discovery journey. I'm here to hold your hand and help you every step of the way. But ultimately, you are going to pave your own path. Because if I said, this is how you get to that conclusion, the problem with that is that that's a conclusion that I came up with. It's not your unique conclusion. And to add another layer of nuance to this is like, what if there is no conclusion? What if everything is just ever evolving and changing? Because the conclusion is the day you're on your deathbed.
There are so many nuggets in here. Like, I can't even count how many quotes I want to just like steal. Like, I want you to come out of the screen and just like say it out loud so that everybody can hear this like really loudly. But we're not going to scream right now. But yeah, like really like just it's finite, right? Like life is not infinite, right? And you said that the only thing that is sure is, that line, right? Which is death. And you don't want to be there, right? And so the only way to really navigate this is not thinking that there is a conclusion, because the conclusion is really the end of life, essentially. I love how you bring philosophy into all of this, and maybe being philosophical also helped you in terms of navigating neurodivergence, even though you were not informed at the moment that you even were, and then navigating the eating disorder, all these reflections that you were able to do. It makes me think in the moment now that maybe having a philosophical kind of, I guess, brain or way of approaching life can really help in terms of figuring things out for yourself.
I think the philosophy and the questioning and the curiosity and having a brain that never stops thinking, it's a gift, and it allows me to write and create and do incredible things, and at the same time, going back to what I said at the beginning of this episode, like everyday suffering is exhausting. Having a brain that is never satisfied, that never can take anything at face value, that challenges everything, even your own thought. And that's where the perfectionism comes in, and the fear of failure, especially in this society, is you question everything, but you also question everything about yourself. And even that is like an existential thing. It's like when you have this thought, or I could do this, it's like, well, which one do I do? Which one is the best option?
Yeah, the choice paradox, the paradox of choice. Yeah,
and that's
hard.
Terrifying, and it's overwhelming. And I mean, feeling physically constrained by this body. I mean, you can tell with me, I am a very high energy person. Like my soul is like this infinite raging fireball that has all these ideas and all these things it wants to say and all these different ways in which I could say it and all these expressions and books I want to write and whatever. And then there's this body that's like has needs and has to eat and has to sleep and has to drink and has to keep itself clean. And there's only so many hours in a day. And I constantly feel trapped in this body. I feel like I'm an infinite universe trapped in a little body. And for me, the eating disorder was a way to make my soul so tired that I could kind of deal with the body and kind of shrink almost into this body so that I didn't have to like feel like I was bursting at the seams the whole time, because that is my daily experience of life, is feeling like I'm bursting at the seams of a human body costume. So that's kind of the cost of the philosophical thinking.
Yeah, I relate to that. My friend and I always joke that why can't we just be one of those la-di-da black and white thinkers? Why do we have to think so deeply into things? It's a gift. And then sometimes it feels like a curse. It feels like it, but I think overwhelmingly, you and I probably both agree that if you are a deep thinker and you are thinking about life, I'm sure people who are tuning into this are, because this is a podcast that really supports thinking. Don't view it as something negative. View it as something where you can really contribute to society in ways that maybe other people can't because they're not thinking about it, right? And so many of our autistic teens and tweens, they have so much to contribute. So many of these individuals that I work with, that I've worked with, are like conquering the world right now. They're out there and they're doing wonderful things, and they are suffering while doing it because it's not a complete neuroaffirming world. There is a world that we live in that is still trying to figure out how to accept people with differences.
Right. And I always like to remind people, like, think of all of the brightest minds of history, the best writers, the best artists, all of them had very severe mental health issues.
Yes. And that's because the cost of being an artist is,
And that's because the cost of being an artist is, yeah, it's extremely high. And that's because of the fact that
from darkness, you gain strength and you gain perspective, and then you can share it with the world in so many different ways, whether it's being an author or whether it's being someone who just brings light to other people. But that light comes obviously, like the global light that you're providing for people, for example, it comes from darkness, but it allows you, like you said, the struggle, like you showed me the graph in the beginning, that where it was basically challenge and skill. You develop skill through challenge. Like, you know what it reminds me of when you're talking about philosophy? All the names you mentioned, I remember from taking the philosophy classes in college, but there was another one, Sisyphus, who had a rock and he was trying to get it to the top. And each day he would try to bring this heavy rock and like schlep it up to the top of the mountain, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's a boulder.
Yeah, a boulder, right? And then each time he tried, and the purpose of that is to show kind of like what you're saying, which is that you may not like get to your destination that you have in your mind, but each day you're trying, right? You're trying, and each day counts that you're trying to get to the destination.
I love that you bring up this Greek myth because Sisyphus he's condemned by the gods to endlessly push up this boulder, but every time he pushes it back up to the top, it rolls back down.
Yes.
And I know I can't change the Greek myth, but to spin...
Well, we can change a lot. We have AI now, right?
To spin this to reality, it's like, what if you just let the fucking boulder roll down all the way? Then you're free.
Oh, see, that's the thing is, Liv, you have the other perspective all the time, right? Which is not people really would think about. Like, I didn't even think about that, right? Is
immediately for me, like, because I'm a visual thinker, so I see this graphic in my mind of this Sisyphus, and I'm like, why don't you just move aside and let the boulder roll down?
Maybe Sisyphus was scared.
Well, he's internally. Well, the thing is,
feelings, but
he couldn't because he's condemned by the gods. You know, with the myth. And that's why I said we can't change the myth. But like, I think that is just the way that I think is intuitively challenging the status quo and asking, well, why do you have to keep pushing if you can just move aside and let the boulder roll down? Like, it doesn't, like So, anyways, but I think what you say, a lot of people don't think like that. We just take things. We see this. We're like, oh, we just need to keep pushing, instead of asking, well, what if I don't have to keep pushing? Like, what would it take to not have to push at all?
Right. But Liv, I need to have you back for a part 2 because
I would love to be back.
Yeah, because I think we could talk for hours. And I don't know if my listeners will tune in for hours, but they will listen to another segment with you where we can dive deeper into Rainbow Girl. We could dive deeper into the podcast that you host, really think about how you've really developed a whole platform built in and rooted in advocacy for multiple groups of people, the autistic population and the ED population, and basically empowered them. And so we want to have you back for a part 2 on this.
I'd love to.
Where can everybody find you, though, for now?
My website, livlabelfree.com. So LIV labelfree.com. And on there, you can find my books, my courses, my coaching, my newsletter. All the things are there. And my Instagram is livlabelfree, too. So. And my podcast too, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Liv. But we'll talk to you very soon.
Yes, definitely.